there's a 4 screen we need to set up. The first one to set up is options. Okay, in options screen, there's a 4 tabs. So the expenses tab are the settings to be applied for the expenses claim. So okay, so this use expenses report type. If we enable, then we'll define the workflow in this expenses report type. If you don't enable, for example, now we see this. Okay, default bank. Okay, then we need to set this bank, choose one bank as a default payment for the expenses reimbursement. Okay. Okay, so just do a test. So you can see now expenses type screen is disappear. It's not show because we disable this option use expenses report type. So if we disable, then we have to define the workflow for expenses claim in the employee registers screen. Okay. So you have to define here expenses report. We can define workflow for this. Okay. Okay, so for new setup, we strongly recommend to enable this option to use expense report type because expense report type is much more powerful than just now we have to set up the workflow in employee registers. The reason the software keep this option is for downward compatible purpose because in old version of RM software don't have the expense report type function. So I will enable back and close. Okay, so close company. So now the expenses report type come back again because we enable this. Then we can specify whether the reimbursable flag is it at defined in expenses code or defined in the expenses report type. So for example, default is expenses code. So you will see this flag non-reimbursable flag is here. If we choose to say specify non-reimbursable flag at the expenses report type, so the non-reimbursable flag is not shown, and instead it comes to here. So you don't have it. Oh, here it comes to here. Non-reimbursable flag option control is in the expenses report type. Okay. So okay, for now let's just use the default first, and then also the control access to expenses code you want to base on the by employee or by expenses report type or don't want to control, and text whether it's ignore or enter manually or calculate. We just let's say choose enter manually. Okay, the others maybe we can just take the default value first, and then the set expenses workflow. Even though we enable this, it still allow you to choose whether want to go for by employee or by expenses report type. But of course, if this one is disabled, then workflow is set by the employee. Okay. Okay, so the rest we can leave it as default first, and others for the detail, meaning we can reference to the menu, or we can have another section of training to explain all these options. Okay. Okay, so travel request tab. Here you can define a default requisition type. So because we haven't defined yet, so you can just leave it blank. Set workflow by either employee or the travel request type. So same, if we choose to use employee, then the workflow is defined in the employee register screen. So if we define based on the travel request type, then it will use the setting from travel request type. Allow non-existent location is like whether depends on whether allow user to use locations not yet defined in the location screen here, in the location screen defined here. Okay, create cache advance on approval of travel request. If enable, then the system will automatically create a cache advance once the the travel request is approved. Okay, cache advance tab. So here is there's three options, whether it will allow to reject of the advance request on backend, or allow to delete of this advance request on backend, or limit advance currency within the reimbursement. Okay. Numbering tab. This tab let us define the numbering rule for expenses and cash advance related transactions. Here you can define the prefix for the expenses report and for advance request, and also the number format, how many digits. Okay, create expenses batch by. It allows us to define the how to organize the expenses report into batch on the back end. So for example, it define based on physical period of document date, and also followed by the division. This one is define what is the maximum number of entries per batch. And we can do the same thing for this cash advance batch. Let's go. Okay, so save. Then to save all the just now the changes we done in this expenses option screen, then close. Okay. Okay, so now let's define few expenses code. These are code to be used on the travel request requisition and expenses report requisition. Okay, let's define, let's say air ticket. Okay, reimbursable, and let's say it's each. Okay, this one, let's say we put the travel expenses account. This one now reimbursable clearing account, we can put maybe the payable clearing account. Can put Canadian dollar. Okay, want to calculate tax, when we set say unit cost, let's say 1000, and default currency, let's say yes. Use this as you will have another currency, then for example USD, then we can do the same thing, setup. Similarly, do the setup. Let's say maybe again. Okay. So we define the Canadian as the default currency because this entry, the functional currency is Canadian. Okay, so tax, we choose the tax authority. Okay. Optional field, now we skip it because we didn't define the optional field previously in the setups folder, the screen in the setup folder. Okay, add this one. Then we add some more. Hotel. Hotel. So maybe 100. Okay. Tax. Add. And create let's say meal. Define. And okay. 50. Say. Right. Taxi. Okay. Put 50 also. No, let's say we don't, this item no need to calculate tax. Okay, so we add. Okay, so now we create 4 for our training purpose. Close. Okay, now that setup few expenses report types. Okay, we create say local expenses. Local expenses claim. So here we can choose the approval workflow. Let's say expenses workflow. So for local expenses claim, we don't need the travel request. So we leave it here. So control, well, we just put it default. Tax group. Okay, choose meals and entertainment. Okay, that's include. Okay, so okay, this one we just leave it as like this, huh? Okay, add. Then we create another one, say travel type. Travel expenses claim. So for this one, we require a travel request. So over travel request checking, we can change, we can set according to, let's say, non warning or error. So we set to warning first. Okay, so done. Okay, so for the travel request type, we also create one default one, let's say travel default type. Okay, so we can define the approval workflow for the travel request. We can select the cancellation workflow and okay, this one type manager we can leave it blank. Okay, so we just leave it blank here. Okay, add. Okay, for travel request maybe we just create one.